There are certain mansions so large, so quiet, so overwhelmingly filled with wealth, that silence itself becomes its own kind of haunting presence. The Ashford estate was one of those places. Acres of perfectly trimmed lawns stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Fountains glistened in the sunlight, and halls were lined with marble, gold, and portraits that seemed to watch every passer-by. Yet for all its grandeur, its corridors echoed with something far heavier than silence, an absence, a void, a grief that money could neither fill nor erase. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video, because when you stop doing this, YouTube understands that you don't like this content and stops recommending good stories like this. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. This was the home of Alexander Ashford, a billionaire who had inherited an empire of steel and construction, a man praised in magazines for his brilliance and strength. To the world, he was a titan. To those who worked for him, he was a man who demanded perfection and tolerated nothing less. But beneath that exterior was a father, one who carried a wound so deep that even he refused to look at it too closely. The wound had a name. Two names, in fact, Ethan and Elise, the twins, his only children, born to him late in life after years of ambition and restless conquest. They should have been his greatest joy. Yet from their earliest days, their existence was overshadowed by mystery and sorrow. They did not cry the way ordinary infants did. Their little bodies, fragile and pale, grew but did not thrive in the ways Alexander had hoped. Doctors were summoned from around the world. Some whispered neurological complications. Others blamed genetics, but none could say with certainty why Ethan and Elise, as they grew, did not meet the milestones other children did. By the time they were 4, the twins still had never spoken a single word. Their lips would part, their eyes would widen, but no sound emerged. They did not run across the lawns like children their age should. They did not call out Papa when Alexander returned from his offices. Instead, they sat, sometimes on the floor, sometimes on the wide velvet chairs of the mansion, staring into spaces only they could see. Elise clutched a small stuffed rabbit until its seams began to tear. Ethan pressed his tiny palms against the glass windows, as if fascinated by the distance of the outside world. The Ashford twins were silent. And in their silence, Alexander felt his empire crumble. He tried to hide it, of course. To the board members, to the public, to the endless parade of journalists who speculated about his fortune, he projected strength. But in the privacy of his home, behind doors gilded with wealth, he was a man undone. His wife, Isabella, once radiant and celebrated for her beauty, could not bear the pain. She retreated first into despair, then into distance, and finally into absence. Rumors spoke of her traveling endlessly through Europe, drowning herself in banquets, affairs, distractions. She left the mansion, and in many ways, she left her children too. And so Alexander Ashford, billionaire, feared negotiator, master of cities, was left with silence. It was in this silence that the staff of the mansion carried on. They moved through the vast corridors like ghosts themselves, careful never to disturb their employer's fragile temper. Nannies came and went. Therapists attempted their sessions. Teachers, specialists, speech experts, mobility trainers, all of them departed after weeks or months, defeated by the unyielding stillness of the twins. Until one morning, when a new maid arrived. Her name was Maria. She was not like the others. Maria came quietly, with nothing but a modest suitcase and a worn pair of shoes that looked out of place on the gleaming marble of the Ashford halls. She had been recommended by someone far down in the hierarchy of the household staff. No one paid much attention to her arrival. Maids were hired and dismissed so often that new faces barely stirred notice. Yet, from the beginning, there was something in the way Maria moved, something gentle, patient, unhurried. That seemed at odds with the restless energy of the estate. She was given ordinary tasks, cleaning, laundry, polishing silver that was rarely used. She was told to stay away from the east wing where the twins were kept, unless called. Most maids obeyed that order gladly, for the east wing was not a place of laughter or warmth. It was a place of whispers, of failed therapies, of echoes of unanswered calls. But Maria noticed. She noticed the small toys left abandoned on the carpet, She noticed the untouched plates of food carried back from the children's rooms. She noticed the stillness behind the doors, and though she was warned not to interfere, something in her heart, something that could not be trained or silenced, was drawn toward those two fragile souls. Days passed. Then weeks. Alexander, ever absorbed in his work and his grief, barely noticed the maid at first. To him, staff were interchangeable. Yet gradually something shifted. He would come home late at night, the weight of business on his shoulders, and he would hear a faint humming sound in the east wing. Not music, not words, just a low, rhythmic hum. At first he thought he imagined it, but then he realized it was real, and it was coming from the maid. Maria had begun to spend her spare moments with Ethan and Elise. She never forced them. She never demanded they speak, never insisted they rise and walk. Instead, she sat with them on the floor. She hummed lullabies that reminded her of the village where she had grown up. She placed small objects before them. Wooden spoons, bits of colored cloth, shells she had brought from the sea. She let them touch, hold, discover. Most astonishing of all, she looked at them not as broken children, but as children, whole in their own mysterious way. The twins responded, though subtly. Elise's fingers, always tight around her stuffed rabbit, began to loosen just enough to hold one of Maria's shells. Ethan, who often pressed against the glass, began to turn when Maria entered the room, his eyes following her with quiet curiosity. It was not speech. It was not walking, but it was something, and it was more than anyone else had ever achieved. Alexander noticed these small changes reluctantly. At first he dismissed them. He had seen countless breakthroughs promised by professionals, only to be followed by disappointment. But as the days stretched on, he could not ignore what he saw. His children seemed calmer, not cured, not transformed, but alive in ways he had long stopped hoping for. He did not approach Maria directly. Pride held him back. But one evening, when he passed by the playroom, he stopped at the threshold unseen. What he witnessed rooted him to the floor. Maria was sitting cross-legged on the rug, humming softly. Elise was beside her, eyes fixed on the maid's hands as Maria slowly stacked blocks in a tower. Elise, with trembling fingers, reached forward and placed a block of her own. The tower wobbled but held. Maria clapped softly, whispering encouragement, and Ethan, dear Ethan, was watching. His lips moved. No sound came, but the effort was there, visible and undeniable. For Alexander, it was as if the ground had shifted beneath him. All the specialists, the doctors, the tutors, had failed. And here, a maid with no training, no credentials, was doing something no one else had. She was reaching them, shock warred with pride. Gratitude clashed with suspicion. Who was this woman? What gave her the right to step into what even he, their father, had been unable to mend? Yet despite himself, he kept watching. Night after night, he lingered in the shadows of the doorway unseen. As Maria worked her quiet, patient magic, the twins responded in ways so subtle most would miss them. But to a father who had lived in silence for years, they were thunderous, and with each passing day, his heart was pulled in two directions, toward hope and toward fear. But in the Ashford mansion, hope was a dangerous thing. Not everyone welcomed Maria's presence. Among the staff, whispers grew. Some resented the maid for drawing the master's attention. Others feared that her methods, so unorthodox, so personal, would eventually backfire. And still others, loyal to Isabella, whispered that no maid should be allowed to replace the mother's role. One evening, as Maria carried a tray toward the east wing, two of the senior housekeepers stopped her. Their words were polite, but their tone was sharp. "Don't overstep, girl. You're here to clean, not to play nurse." Maria bowed her head respectfully, but inside she knew she would not stop, not when two fragile lives were beginning at last to bloom. Still, she could not ignore the warning. In the Ashford estate, power was not merely in wealth, it was in perception. And if she drew too much attention, her presence could be ended with a single command. Yet the risk did not deter her, because every time Ethan's eyes found hers, every time Elise's trembling hands reached for a toy she offered, Maria knew she was doing something that mattered more than all the riches in the world, and so she continued. Quietly, carefully, secretly, but secrets have a way of coming to light. One stormy night, Alexander returned home earlier than expected. Rain lashed against the windows. Thunder rolled through the hills. He strode through the halls, weary and restless, until he heard it again, the faint hum. This time he did not linger in the doorway. This time he entered the room. What he saw stopped him cold. Maria was not merely humming. She was holding Elise in her lap, guiding the little girl's hands across a small drum. Ethan was beside them, his palms pressed against the surface, feeling the vibration of each beat. The twins were smiling, not wide, not loud, but smiling, their faces lit by a joy so rare it was almost otherworldly. For a long moment, Alexander could not move. The shock was too great. The billionaire, the master of empires, the man who commanded entire cities, stood powerless before the sight of his children connecting to life through the hands of a maid. And in that instant, a question he had never dared ask thundered in his mind. What if the doctors were wrong? What if the silence of his children was not an unbreakable curse? What if they were waiting for someone to see them not as broken but as whole? The thought was unbearable and yet undeniable. But even as Alexander wrestled with this revelation, danger loomed. For not everyone would allow Maria to continue. There were forces in the mansion, forces of pride, jealousy, and hidden agendas that would see her gone. And Alexander himself, torn between gratitude and fear, would soon face a decision that would test not only his wealth and power, but his very soul, because what he had witnessed was not merely a maid's kindness. It was the beginning of something greater, something that would shake the Ashford mansion to its very foundations, something that would change everything. The storm that had battered the estate that night lingered in Alexander Ashford's mind long after the rain had dried. For days, he could not erase the image of Maria on the floor with his twins, Ethan's hands pressing against the drum, Elise's fragile smile, the maid's soft humming that seemed to ripple through the silence of his children like light breaking through darkness. It unsettled him. For a man like Alexander, accustomed to controlling boardrooms, cities, and legions of employees, the sight of one ordinary maid succeeding where the greatest specialists had failed was both miraculous and humiliating. He wanted to believe it was a coincidence, a fleeting moment of chance. Yet when he observed again, silently from a distance, he saw the same impossible truth repeat itself. The twins responded to Maria, not to their therapists, not to their teachers, not even to him. To her, and it left Alexander with a gnawing question. Why her? The mansion seemed to notice too. Staff who had long resigned themselves to the children's silence began to whisper of changes. Small changes, but undeniable. Elise was seen reaching for objects instead of staring blankly. Ethan sometimes tapped his fingers on the glass in rhythm, as though recalling Maria's drum. To the average eye, they were crumbs too small to matter. But in a household that had lived under a shadow for years, crumbs felt like miracles, yet not all saw it as a blessing. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Denning, had ruled the staff with a stern hand for over 2 decades. She had seen maids come and go, most dismissed for the smallest infractions. She believed order and hierarchy were what kept the estate from collapsing into chaos. And to her eyes, Maria was a disruption. "She's overstepping," Mrs. Denning muttered one evening to the butler, her lips pursed tight. "It is not her place to meddle. The master may tolerate her for now, but he will see soon enough. And when he does, she will be gone." The butler, older and kinder, only sighed. "Perhaps," he said softly, "but perhaps the children need what she gives them." Mrs. Denning's glare was sharp as glass. "The children need discipline, not sentimentality." And with that, the matter was sealed in her mind. Meanwhile, Maria continued quietly, unaware of the gathering storm. She had no grand strategy, no medical theory. She only had instinct, born of a heart that had known suffering. She had grown up in poverty, in a village where children often raised themselves in the absence of busy or broken parents. She had cared for younger siblings, had soothed them with lullabies when hunger clawed at their stomachs. She knew what it was to feel unseen, unheard, left to drift in silence. Perhaps that was why she could reach Ethan and Elise. She did not see them as puzzles to be solved or burdens to be endured. She saw them as children in need of warmth. She began introducing them to textures, silk scarves, smooth stones, wooden beads. She encouraged them to press their fingers into flour as she kneaded dough in the kitchen, to feel the powdery softness transform into something whole. She brought them into the gardens when no one was watching, letting the wind ruffle their hair, letting sunlight fall on their pale faces. Slowly, like fragile shoots pushing through winter frost, the twins responded. Elise's eyes would sometimes follow butterflies with faint curiosity. Ethan would tilt his head when birdsong filled the air. Their silence remained, but it was no longer the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of listening. Alexander, too, was listening. He had begun to alter his routines without admitting it, returning home earlier, lingering near the east wing under the guise of checking reports. He told himself it was mere curiosity, but deep inside he knew it was something else. Hope, dangerous, treacherous hope, was pulling him closer. One night he entered the playroom unannounced. Maria froze, startled, rising to her feet. The twins blinked at their father, their momentary peace interrupted. Alexander began, his voice rougher than he intended. I heard laughter. Maria hesitated, unsure whether to apologize or explain. In truth, it had been little more than a giggle from Elise, a fleeting sound, soft and uncertain. But it had been laughter nonetheless. For Alexander, the word itself felt foreign. Laughter had been absent from his home for so long that he scarcely remembered its sound. His throat tightened. Continue, he ordered abruptly, masking his emotion. And then he turned and left before Maria could respond. Behind his back, Maria exhaled, her heart pounding. She had not been dismissed. Not yet. But the storm within the mansion was only beginning. When Isabella Ashford returned unexpectedly one golden afternoon, the household erupted into a flurry of preparation. The estranged wife, long absent, swept into the halls draped in jewels and silk, her perfume filling every room before her voice did. Alexander, she called, her tone sharp, commanding, as though she had never left. The reunion between husband and wife was cold, brittle, and filled with unspoken reproach. Isabella had never been able to face the reality of her children's condition. To her, their silence was not merely a tragedy, but a stain, a blemish upon the perfect life she had been promised. She avoided the East Wing like a cursed place, preferring to drown herself in society's distractions. But now, her sudden return carried with it a dangerous curiosity. I heard, she said one evening, her voice laced with suspicion, that the children are different, more responsive. Someone has been meddling. Alexander stiffened. He did not answer immediately. He did not want to admit that the source of that change was a maid, a common maid whose name Isabella scarcely knew. Yet Isabella pressed on. Do not tell me you've placed your hopes in one of the staff. It would be ridiculous, dangerous. Her words carried the venom of pride, the arrogance of one who could not bear the thought of being replaced. For Isabella, the idea that a maid could succeed where she had failed as a mother was unbearable. That night, when Maria guided Elise's hands to stack a block atop another, she felt eyes watching her. And when she turned, she saw Isabella standing in the doorway, her gaze cold, her lips curled in disdain. Out, Isabella said simply. Maria froze, confused. I said out. Leave the room now, Maria obeyed, her chest tight with fear. She knew in that moment her place in the mansion was more precarious than ever. The days that followed were tense. Isabella lingered near the children more often, attempting half-hearted interactions, only to withdraw in frustration when they did not respond. She criticized the staff, accused them of negligence, demanded changes in routine. Yet the twins remained as they were, withdrawn, silent, until Maria quietly reappeared at their side, and the moment she did, the spark returned. It was subtle, but undeniable. The children leaned toward her, their eyes softened, their small hands reached out. Isabella saw it, and in her eyes anger flared. The maid was becoming a threat. One evening, when Alexander returned late from the city, he found Isabella waiting in the grand study, her wineglass trembling with unspoken fury. That woman, she hissed, has bewitched them. Don't you see? They look to her instead of us. Instead of me. Are you blind, Alexander? She is undermining us in our own house. Alexander's jaw tightened. He wanted to dismiss her words as jealous nonsense. But the truth was harder. He had seen the children respond. He had felt his own heart shift in Maria's presence. Yet to admit it would mean admitting his own failures, that his billions, his pride, his power had all been meaningless compared to the compassion of one maid. He could not speak. He could only sit in silence, the storm brewing between them. Maria, unaware of the conversation, continued her quiet work, but the walls of the mansion seemed to close in. Mrs. Denning watched her with hawk-like suspicion. Isabella's disdain grew more venomous each day. Even some of the lower maids whispered that Maria was courting danger, that no one could rise so high in the master's notice without consequences. But Maria could not stop. She had seen too much of the twins' progress to abandon them now. She had felt Elise's hand press against her cheek, had seen Ethan's lips part as if to form a sound. She had heard, just once, the faintest murmur escape Elise's throat. They sound so fragile it broke her heart with hope. She knew something was awakening in them, and she feared it might be crushed before it could fully bloom. Then came the night that would change everything. Alexander had returned home unusually late, his mind clouded with business disputes. As he walked toward the east wing, he heard something that made him stop in his tracks. Not humming, not blocks tumbling, not footsteps. A voice, soft, trembling, broken, but a voice. His heart froze. He hurried down the corridor, his chest pounding, and pushed open the playroom door. Inside, Maria sat on the floor, her face wet with tears. In front of her, Elise's lips had parted, and from them had come a single sound, fragile syllable. It was not clear, not perfect, but it was real. Alexander's breath caught. For the first time in their lives, one of his children had spoken, and he had walked in at the very moment it happened. But he was not the only witness. From the shadows of the doorway, Isabella stood, her face pale, her hands clenched around the frame. Her eyes burned with something between horror and fury, because the word, if it could be called a word, had not been spoken to her. It had been spoken to the maid. The night Elise's fragile voice broke through the silence of years should have been a night of celebration. It should have been the moment Alexander Ashford gathered his children in trembling arms, the moment hope poured into the hollows of his soul like fire into frozen veins. But joy did not fill the room that night. Instead, the air thickened with tension. Maria's tears sparkled as she cradled Elise close, whispering encouragement, promising gently that every small sound mattered. Ethan pressed closer too, as though sensing his sister's courage. For them, the world had shifted, but for Isabella Ashford, watching from the doorway, the sight was unbearable. Her daughter's first attempt at speech, a miracle years in the waiting, had not been offered to her. The mother who had given birth, but to a maid, a common servant in plain clothes with no blood ties, no status, no rightful claim. It was more than jealousy. It was humiliation, and humiliation in Isabella's world was unforgivable. The days that followed unfolded like a tightening noose. Isabella's return to the mansion, once seen by the staff as temporary, grew heavier with each passing hour. She lingered in the east wing now, demanding to witness progress, her presence stiff and unnatural. When Maria entered the children's rooms, Isabella was already there, forcing toys into Elise's hands, urging words from Ethan's lips with an impatience that made them retreat further into silence. And when Maria so much as approached, Isabella would rise like a queen guarding her throne. "You are not needed," Isabella snapped once, her voice cold enough to freeze the marrow. "Leave us now," Maria obeyed outwardly, but inwardly her heart burned. She had seen the spark in the twins' eyes, felt the tentative beat of life returning. To abandon them now would be a betrayal far deeper than disobedience, and so she returned in secret. Late at night, when the mansion slept, she would slip into the playroom. She would bring her little drum, her scarves, her shells, and there, in whispers, she would coax the children into small miracles. A smile here, a murmur there, a hand raised, a gaze held, a spark lit. They trusted her. They needed her, but the walls had ears. And Isabella was listening. Alexander, meanwhile, was a man divided. His empire demanded his attention, but his mind remained anchored in the east wing. The sound he had heard, the first trembling word from Elise's lips, haunted him, replayed endlessly in his memory. awakening something long dormant in his chest. But with hope came fear. What if it had been only a fluke? What if it never came again? What if the fragile progress shattered under the weight of expectation? And worse still, what if his wife was right? What if Maria was overstepping, intruding where she did not belong, drawing loyalty from his children that should have been his and Isabella's? The conflict gnawed at him night and day. He watched Maria from afar, watched his children lean toward her with trust, watched Isabella seethe in silence. And in that storm of pride, fear, and longing, Alexander found himself paralyzed. A man who could conquer cities could not conquer the battlefield of his own heart. The mansion itself became divided. Some staff, moved by whispers of progress, grew protective of Maria. The butler, old and weary, confided in her one morning as he handed her a tray. "You give them something we cannot, child. Do not lose courage, but tread carefully. There are eyes in these halls that wish you gone." Others, loyal to Isabella or fearful of her wrath, turned against Maria. Mrs. Denning, ever watchful, began documenting her movements. "She lingers where she should not linger," the housekeeper murmured to Isabella in hushed tones. "She tempts the children into unhealthy attachment. It is unnatural. Unhealthy attachment." The words lodged like a poison in Isabella's mind. She began to believe them, and so the plan formed. One evening, as Alexander prepared to depart for a week-long business trip overseas, Isabella approached him with an air of forced calm. "You go where you must," she said smoothly, her hand trailing his arm. "But while you are gone, changes must be made. The children need stability, not confusion, not chaos, stability." He looked at her warily. "What are you implying?" "That maid," Isabella replied, her voice sharp as glass. "She undermines me. She undermines us. I will not allow it. While you are away, I will restore order. I will protect my children from her meddling." Alexander stiffened. His instinct was to protest, to defend Maria, to declare that she was the only one who had truly reached the twins. But pride held him back. Admitting that would mean admitting his own failures, admitting that a servant succeeded where he had not, and so he said nothing. And silence, in the Ashford household, was as dangerous as a weapon. Maria felt the shift almost immediately. Isabella's presence in the East Wing grew suffocating. Doors that had once been left ajar were now locked. Toys she had used were taken away. She was reassigned to distant tasks in the mansion, far from the children. And then came the final blow. Mrs. Denning appeared at her chamber one morning, her face expressionless, holding a sealed envelope. "The mistress has decided," she said curtly. "You are dismissed." Effective immediately, Maria's breath caught. Her knees weakened. "Dismissed? Why? What have I done?" Mrs. Denning's lips thinned. "You overstepped. You forgot your place. This is not your home. These are not your children." The words struck harder than any blade. Maria's chest burned, her eyes filled. She wanted to scream, to beg, to protest that she had given nothing but love, that she had seen miracles no one else had cared to see. But the butler's sorrowful gaze over Mrs. Denning's shoulder told her the truth. Resistance would only make it worse. So Maria lowered her head, clutching the envelope, her heart breaking silently within her chest. That evening, as she packed her modest belongings, she slipped one last time toward the East Wing. She could not leave without seeing them, without saying goodbye. The playroom door was ajar. Inside, the twins sat listlessly, their faces pale, their hands limp at their sides. Isabella was nowhere to be seen. The toys lay scattered, untouched. Maria's heart clenched. She stepped inside softly. "Ethan, Elise," she whispered, her voice trembling. The children's heads turned. For a heartbeat, their eyes brightened. Elise reached weakly toward her. Ethan made a faint sound, a small whimper as though sensing the truth. Maria dropped to her knees, gathering them close. Tears streamed down her face as she pressed her lips to their hair. "I don't want to leave you," she whispered. "But they won't let me stay. You must be strong, my little ones. Stronger than they know." The twins clung to her, their silence louder than screams. She knew she had to go. She knew she had no power to stay. And yet as she pulled away, Elise's lips parted. "Ma." The sound was faint, broken, fragile, but it was unmistakable. Maria froze. her heart shattering. Her name. The child had spoken her name, not mama, not papa, not even a meaningless syllable. Her name. And in that moment, Maria realized the truth. She was not just a maid to them. She was something deeper, something irreplaceable. But footsteps thundered down the hall. Voices rose. Isabella's shrill command cut through the air. Get her out. Now, the door burst open. Guards, yes, guards, summoned for the humiliation of a maid, stormed inside. They seized Maria by the arms, wrenching her away from the twins. She cried out, begged, fought, but it was no use. The children wailed in silence, their lips moving but no sound escaping, their little bodies trembling with terror. The guards dragged her down the marble halls, her cries echoing. And in the east wing, two children who had never spoken more than broken murmurs pressed their hands against the glass once more, staring into the emptiness as their only source of warmth was torn away. When Alexander returned from his trip days later, he expected to hear progress. He expected to hear of miracles. He expected to see the spark again. Instead, he found his children colder, paler, emptier than ever. Elise clutched her rabbit with desperate intensity, her lips sealed tight. Ethan no longer pressed his hands to the glass. Their eyes, once brightening, had dimmed into shadows, and when he asked, in a voice trembling with dread, "Where is Maria?" the answer chilled him to the core. "Dismissed," Isabella replied smoothly, sipping her wine. She was poisoning them with false hope. "I did what had to be done." Alexander's jaw clenched. His heart thundered. For the first time in years, rage coursed through him. Not the rage of business, but the rage of a father, because deep down, he knew she was lying. He knew Maria had been the key, and now she was gone. But Alexander Ashford was not a man accustomed to losing. He was not a man who allowed others to dictate his fate. And as he stood in the silent halls of his mansion, watching his children retreat once more into darkness, he swore to himself that he would find her. He would bring Maria back, no matter the cost. The Ashford mansion had always been a monument to control. Its marble floors gleamed as if to reflect the image of a family untouched by imperfection. Its towering gates suggested a fortress, keeping out the chaos of the world. Yet within those walls, Alexander Ashford felt powerless. The children had withdrawn again. Their brief moments of laughter, of sound, of fragile joy, all vanished. Elise clutched her rabbit until its seams threatened to burst. Ethan pressed no longer against the glass but curled inward, rocking silently, as though the warmth they had once known had been ripped from them. Alexander could not bear it. He had been gone a single week, and in that week, the fragile light Maria had sparked had been extinguished. Isabella claimed it was for the best. She claimed the maid had been interfering, creating false dependency. She claimed order had been restored. But Alexander saw the truth in his children's hollow eyes. They had not lost order. They had lost love, and the realization burned. The night after his return, Alexander sat alone in his study. The fire hissed low in the hearth. Documents from his empire lay spread across the desk, but his eyes did not see them. His mind returned to one moment again and again. Elise's trembling voice whispering, "Ma." Her first word, not to him, not to Isabella, to Maria. He poured himself a drink, though the liquid scorched his throat like fire. He thought of his wealth, his power, his endless resources. All of it had failed to reach his children. Yet one woman, with nothing but her bare hands and her heart, had succeeded, and now she was gone. The fury in his chest grew unbearable. He slammed the glass down so hard it shattered, shards flying across the desk. "No," he whispered to the empty room. "Not like this. I will not lose her." That night, he made his decision. He would find Maria. He would bring her back, no matter the cost. But finding her was not as simple as it should have been. When he summoned Mrs. Denning and demanded Maria's whereabouts, the housekeeper offered only a prim bow. "She has left, sir." The mistress dismissed her. "I am aware of that," Alexander growled. "Where did she go?" Mrs. Denning's lips pressed into a thin line. "I do not know. She left no forwarding address. She was given her wages and departed." "Find out," Alexander snapped. But days passed and Mrs. Denning returned with empty hands. "She is gone, sir," she repeated. "A woman like her has no trace. No records, no ties. She will not be found." Alexander did not believe it. Every person left a trace. And if the housekeeper would not help him, he would use other means. He turned to his private investigators, the same men he employed to track rival CEOs, to uncover scandals before they reached the press. Her name is Maria, he told them, handing over the few details he knew. She was in my employment. She cared for my children. Find her. The men bowed and disappeared into the night. Days turned into weeks. Leads surfaced, then crumbled. A woman answering her description seen boarding a bus 2 towns over. A maid by the name of Maria, working briefly in a small inn before vanishing again. A church that claimed she once lit candles there, though the priest said she had spoken little. It was as though she had melted into the air, and each day she remained missing. The twins grew worse. Elise's lips no longer parted. The small attempt at speech had vanished as if it had never happened. Ethan no longer made even the faint sounds he once had. Both children sank deeper into silence, their bodies weaker, their spirits dimmer. Alexander's heart broke anew with every passing hour, and Isabella watched with a kind of cruel satisfaction. You see, she told him one evening, her smile thin and bitter. The maid was nothing more than a distraction, a dangerous influence. They are better without her. Better? Alexander's voice thundered, the sound echoing through the marble halls. Look at them. They are shadows of what they were. They were always shadows, Isabella retorted coldly. And no maid will change that. Her words stung like poison. And in that moment, Alexander realized the chasm between them was unbridgeable. The investigators returned at last, weeks later, with a thin folder. We've traced her, the lead reported cautiously, or at least fragments of her past. Alexander seized the file, flipping it open with impatient hands. Inside were scraps of information. Maria's full name, a record of her birth in a coastal village, a baptism certificate stained with water damage, mentions of a childhood marked by hardship, an ill mother, a father who had disappeared, and then something that made Alexander's blood run cold. She had once been admitted briefly to a medical facility, not as a patient of physical illness but for evaluation. The report was vague, almost deliberately obscured. It spoke of trauma, of a child who did not speak for years, who sat in silence staring at walls, refusing words. It spoke of a girl who had once been like his. Twins, Alexander's hands trembled as he closed the file. Maria had not merely reached his children, she had been them. The realization hit him, like a tidal wave. No wonder she understood them. No wonder she moved with such patience, such instinct. She was not guessing, she was remembering. She had walked through their silence herself, and somehow she had found her way back to words, to connection, to life, and she had dared to give his children what she had once been denied. Hope. Alexander's chest tightened. For the first time, he understood the depth of what had been taken from his children when Maria was dismissed, and he swore, more fiercely than ever, that he would not rest until she was found. But while Alexander sought Maria in the shadows of her past, Isabella spun her own webs. She had grown restless, watching her husband grow more distant, his gaze consumed not by her, not by the empire, but by the memory of a servant. She felt her control slipping, and with it her pride. And Isabella Ashford was a woman who would rather destroy than be diminished. She called Mrs. Denning to her chambers late one night. The firelight flickered against her jewels as she whispered her orders. The maid will not return. Do you understand me? Whatever the master thinks, whatever he wants, she will not return. Mrs. Denning hesitated, fear flickering in her eyes. Madam, if he insists, then we make it impossible, Isabella snapped. Erase her. If she dares to come back, she will not find welcome here. She will not find safety. Do you hear me? The housekeeper bowed reluctantly. Yes, madam. And thus the battle lines were drawn. Alexander pressed his investigators harder. He ordered them to comb through every village, every shelter, every hospital record. The search expanded beyond the country, into neighboring lands, chasing rumors of a woman with kind eyes who sang to children. Each night he returned home empty-handed. Each night he saw his children fading further. Until one evening, a message arrived. The investigators had found her. She was living in a small coastal town, miles from the mansion, working in a modest bakery owned by an elderly couple. She kept to herself, spoke little, but sang as she worked. Customers remarked on her kindness, on the way she smiled at children. It was her. Alexander did not hesitate. He ordered the car at dawn. He rode for hours, his mind racing, his heart pounding. And at last he saw her. Through the bakery window, he saw Maria kneading dough, her hair pulled back, her face tired but peaceful. Flour dusted her hands like white gloves. She looked older, wearier, but she was alive. Alexander stepped from the car, his chest tight. For the first time in his life, the billionaire who commanded empires felt like a beggar. He pushed open the bakery door. A bell rang softly. Maria looked up. Their eyes met. Time froze, Maria's lips parted. Her hands trembled. For a heartbeat. Hope flared between them, raw, desperate. Spoken, and then a shadow fell across the door, a voice cold and sharp as steel. Cut through the fragile moment. You shouldn't be here. Alexander turned. Isabella stood in the doorway. The bakery smelled of bread and warmth, but in that moment it became a battlefield. Alexander froze between the woman who had saved his children and the woman who had birthed them. Isabella's eyes blazed, sharp as shattered glass, her jeweled fingers clutching the doorframe as though she owned the very air Maria breathed. Maria's face drained of color. Her hands trembled, flour scattering across the counter like snow. She glanced between them, trapped, her silence more powerful than any scream. For a long moment no one moved. The air was thick with unspoken truths, with years of pain pressing down upon 3 lives tangled by fate. Alexander, Isabella said at last, her voice deceptively calm. You shouldn't be here. This farce must end. Alexander's jaw tightened. This farce, he echoed, his voice low, dangerous, is the only light our children have known. They are my children, Isabella snapped, her mask cracking. Mine, and I will not have them raised by a... She cut herself off, her eyes narrowing at Maria like daggers. By someone like her. The words sliced through Maria's fragile composure. She lowered her gaze, her shoulders curling inward as if to make herself small. But Alexander saw it. The way her fingers gripped the counter, the way her breath trembled but did not break. There was strength beneath the wound, and he could no longer remain silent. You dismissed her, Alexander said, his voice rising, years of restrained fury spilling free. You tore her from them, and you watched them collapse into silence again. You knew. You wanted it. Isabella flinched but recovered quickly, her lips curling into a bitter smile. I wanted what was best. Not false hope, not delusion spun by a servant who knows nothing of medicine, nothing of their condition. She knows more than you ever cared to learn, Alexander thundered, his fists clenched. Do you even realize why she reached them? Why they spoke, why they laughed? It wasn't chance. It wasn't some trick. She lived their silence. She was them. Isabella blinked, startled, her composure faltering. Alexander's voice shook with the weight of revelation. She was once a child who did not speak, who did not walk, who was written off as broken, forgotten, discarded. And yet she fought her way back. She knows their world because it was her world, and she would have given them the key out of it, if not for you. The bakery was silent save for Alexander's ragged breathing. Isabella's face twisted, torn between fury and disbelief. But Maria's eyes filled with tears, tears not of weakness but of recognition. At last, Maria found her voice. It was soft, almost fragile, yet stronger than Isabella's venom. It's true, she whispered. Her accent curled gently around the words. I was like them, silent, still. The world thought I would never change. But someone believed in me, not with money, not with power, with patience, with love. And because of that, I found my way back. Her eyes lifted to Alexander's, shimmering with pain and hope all at once. That is why I knew how to reach them. Because I know what it feels like to be unseen, to be caged inside your own silence. And I will not. I cannot watch them lose that chance. Her words struck like lightning, illuminating every shadow that had haunted the Ashford mansion. For the first time, Isabella faltered. She staggered a step back, her mask slipping to reveal something raw beneath: fear. Fear of losing her control, fear of losing what she believed was hers. But fear in Isabella only hardened into cruelty. You think this makes you special? She hissed, her voice sharp as a whip. You think one miracle word, one forced laugh changes what they are? They are damaged, hopeless. Nothing you do will ever fix that. Maria flinched, her tears spilling, but Alexander stepped forward, his fury unchained. Enough, he roared. The sound shook the tiny bakery, startling even the elderly baker and his wife in the back. Do not speak of them that way. Do not dare. His eyes burned into Isabella's. They are not hopeless. They are not broken. They are my children, and they will never again be treated as burdens to your pride. For a moment, Isabella looked at him as though she did not recognize the man before her. Perhaps she never had. Perhaps the empire had always mattered more to her than the fragile souls of their children. You would choose her, she spat bitterly. A maid over me, over everything we built. Alexander's voice was steady, unflinching. I would choose love. I would choose the twins. And I would choose the woman who gave them what you never could. Silence fell, heavy and final. Isabella's face twisted in rage, but beneath it lay defeat. She saw it now. She had lost. Not to Maria, not to Alexander, but to the truth. Without another word, Isabella turned sharply on her heel, the bell above the bakery door ringing violently as she stormed into the street. The silence she left behind was deafening. Maria stood frozen, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with disbelief. She could not fathom what had just happened, what Alexander had said, what he had chosen. But Alexander stepped toward her, his voice breaking now not with anger, but with desperation. Maria, he said softly, come home. Her tears spilled freely now. Home? She echoed as though the word were foreign. Yes, Alexander said firmly. To them, to Elise and Ethan. They need you. I need you. We cannot do this without you. Maria's lips trembled. For a long moment she said nothing, torn between fear and longing. But at last she nodded, slowly, as though surrendering not to him, but to the call of two children who had stolen her heart. The return to the mansion was not easy. The staff whispered. The walls still carried Isabella's shadow. But when Maria stepped into the nursery once more, everything else faded. Elise sat curled in her chair, clutching her rabbit. Ethan lay on the rug, his eyes distant. The silence was suffocating. Maria sank to her knees before them. Elise. Ethan, her voice shook. It's me. For a moment there was nothing. No movement, no sound. And then Elise's fingers uncurled. The rabbit slipped to the floor. She reached out, her tiny hand trembling, and touched Maria's face. Ma. The word was a breath, a whisper, but it was real. Maria broke, sobbing as she pulled the little girl into her arms. Ethan's eyes widened, and with a sudden, desperate sound, he crawled into the embrace too. The three of them clung together, a fragile knot of brokenness and healing, of silence and song. And Alexander, watching from the doorway, felt his heart shatter and mend all at once. From that day, the mansion changed. Maria did not perform miracles overnight, but she brought consistency, patience, warmth. Each day she coaxed the twins with music, with gentle games, with unwavering love. Slowly, words began to surface. Slowly, tiny steps replaced stillness. It was not perfect. It was not easy, but it was progress. And for the first time, Alexander felt hope take root not in fleeting glimpses, but in a future he could see. Isabella did not vanish entirely. She lingered in the shadows of gossip, in the sharp whispers of society, but she no longer held dominion over the Ashford household. The children's laughter, fragile but growing, was louder than her venom could ever be. And Maria, once a maid, became something far greater. She became the bridge between silence and sound, despair and hope. She became the heart of the home. Months later, Alexander stood at the edge of the garden, watching Elise toddle clumsily across the grass. Ethan's laughter ringing clear as a bell beside her. Maria stood near them, guiding, supporting, her face radiant with joy. Alexander's chest swelled with a feeling he had not known in years. Not power, not wealth. Something far greater. Love. And though the world might never understand the journey they had taken, though scars would remain, the truth was undeniable. The billionaire's twins did not walk and did not speak, until love, in the form of a humble maid, gave them back their voices.